Welcome back and thanks for stopping by. And we're going to use this episode to dedicate it to the memory of John Lennon, who passed away 44 years ago today on the 8th of December 1980. So John Winston Lennon, born 9th of October 1940, was an English singer, songwriter, musician and political activist. He gained worldwide fame as the founder, co-vocalist and rhythm guitarist of the Beatles. His songwriting partnership with Paul McCartney remains the most successful in music history. So around this time every year, I like to think about John Lennon's life and I suppose the impact it's had on me, from me listening to music and getting into music from a very young age. Obviously John had passed away before I was born, but his music was very much alive in my house when we were growing up, and certainly the Beatles were a huge influence on me in relation to getting into music and exploring different types of music, particularly rock and roll and rock and guitar led music. So I'm just going to run through a couple of the albums that I think are very important, well the ones I own anyway, in relation to John's career. So obviously he co-founded the Beatles with Paul McCartney and George Harrison, and Ringo Starr joined shortly thereafter. They had some very, pop 60s albums in the early 60s, and then they came up with this one, Rubber Soul, in 1965. An absolute classic. Brilliant songwriting by McCartney and Lennon on this one. It's got Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, Michelle, Girl. Absolutely brilliant. Top-notch album and one of the Beatles' best, and it was a change in direction from what they had released earlier, from all the pop type stuff into a bit more kind of songwriting style. They followed that up with Revolver, which was released in 1966. Again, another classic, absolutely brilliant album. It's got Taxman, Eleanor Rigby, Yellow Submarine is on this one, Good Day Sunshine, Dr. Robert, I like that one myself, Tomorrow Never Knows, Got to Get You Into My Life, absolutely brilliant. A brilliant album, Revolver, 1966. Then, of course, the breakthrough album, or should I say groundbreaking album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 1967. An absolute classic from start to finish. Really broke the barriers down in terms of what could be achieved sonically in the studio. I've done a video on this, so go check it out and do a deep dive on all the songs and the production techniques. But this one was absolutely groundbreaking, not just for the Beatles, but for music in general in the 1960s. Following that then, I have 1969's Abbey Road, arguably their best album, absolutely brilliant. Iconic cover as well, similar to Sgt. Pepper's. This one's just brilliant from start to finish again. Come Together, Something, Octopus's Garden, Here Comes the Sun, Because, Me, Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, She Came Through the Bathroom Window. Love that melody. Then they've got Carried Away at the End, Her Majesty. Absolutely brilliant. Brilliant album from start to finish. One of the Beatles' best, Abbey Road. Finished off with Let It Be, which was documented in the movie that was released a number of years ago called Get Back. A lot of people don't like this album, think Abbey Road is stronger. I'd agree Abbey Road is stronger, but I do think Let It Be is a very strong album. It's got Two of Us, Dig a Pony, Across the Universe, another John Lennon classic, I, Me, Mine, Let It Be, of course, the title track. I've Got a Feeling is a brilliant song as well. Long and Winding Road, I could take or leave it, not one of my favourite. And then, of course, Get Back, which was a Paul McCartney-led song. So you can really see in the Beatles albums, their earlier albums are more driven by John Lennon. He's kind of the leader of the band, but he does take a back seat later on in their career, and that's pretty evident in a lot of songwriting as they get closer to the end of their career. I don't actually own the White Album, but I intend to change that in the new year. So this album here is actually a very interesting one, because this is the one that really got me into the Beatles in the late 1990s. It's called the Red Album. It was produced as a best of. There was the Red Album and the Blue Album. So the Red Album covered the years from 1962 up to 1966, and then the Blue Album covered from 67 onwards. This is absolutely brilliant. It's basically the best of the Beatles, but it's over 2 discs. So you've got about 2 hours of music on this one, and over 2 hours on the blue one. Now this particular version was released in 1993. I've actually lost one of the discs in it, and it's pretty tattered. You can see it's the holder there is broken, and the other one, the disc, is just floating around. They're early remasters, so they're not particularly fantastic. It does have the original mono mixes of Love Me Do, Please Please Me, From Me to You, and She Loves You, which is quite cool to have those. But yeah, not something I listen to very often, but it was my segue into the Beatles. Then I got this one here, which was one of the anthologies. I think this is number 3. So again, this gave me a good introduction to some of the later tracks, but they were all studio outtakes and demos and a lot of chit chat between songs. So it's a pretty cool way to get into the Beatles, but again, don't reach for it a whole lot now, to be honest. Okay, after that one then, I actually went and picked up the Blue album. This was a remaster, so they were released, I think it was in the 1970s they were originally released. Then they were remastered for CD in 1993, and then they were remastered again in 2009 and 2010. And this was a full stereo recording of every song, as you'd expect, and this took on the later years of the Beatles from 1967 right through to 1970, and this was absolutely fantastic. But it was a cardboard sleeve, as you can see, and it got completely tattered over the years. The discs still play fine, but the packaging is in bad order, so that's one reason I don't really like these cardboard sleeves. I prefer the jewel cases. You can see it's wrecked, but anyway, that was great for me to get into the later half of Beatles stuff. And then most recently, last year, the Red and Blue albums were re-released with additional songs, additional mixes. They had the original 4 tracks I mentioned earlier on the Red album in stereo mix, so I had to pick these up. So this is the latest version of the Red album, 12 extra tracks and new mixes and in stereo, and absolutely top of the range. This is high-end quality. And then I also bought the Blue album just for completeness. The Blue album contains an extra 9 tracks, including the new single that was released in 2023 last year, Now and Then. So that's the Blue album. Now, I haven't taken any chances with these ones because the last ones got tattered. I've actually put them straight into a plastic sleeve to try and preserve them a bit longer. So it seems to be working so far, but we'll see how that goes. So that's the Beatles, all the Beatles albums I own. And then, of course, there's the John Lennon stuff, because that's who we're talking about today. And I have this Lennon Legend. Now, I've never actually gone and bought any of John's solo albums. And I just never really saw the need to go out and buy them. I've listened to a lot of them on Spotify. Some of them are very strong, some of them are weak, to be honest. There's a lot of filler. And John, when he left the Beatles, he went and recorded a number of albums in the early 1970s. With Yoko Ono, and they had the Plastic Ono Band and all that stuff going on. And then around 1975, he really stopped making music for a number of years there. And then he was working on an album when he passed away, and then that got released posthumously. But yeah, it was unfortunate that John didn't keep going making music throughout the 1970s, because they've actually brought up a lot of the recordings that he made at home, such as Free as a Bird, Real Love, and Now and Then, and they've turned them into hits in the 1990s and then just last year. So yeah, it would have been interesting to see what they could do, and of course it would have been interesting to see if the Beatles would ever have gotten back together had John stayed alive. But look, that's not what happened, and the legacy is what it is. So that's just a little intro into the Beatles, the records I have by the Beatles, or the CDs I have by the Beatles, and how much John Lennon meant to me as a musician growing up and learning about music. And as I say, I always think about John on the 8th of December every year, and think about the contribution he had to music overall, but also to my journey music. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Rest in peace, John Lennon. Bye now.